Hi, my name is Reed Silverne. The name of this show is Fed Pride. The reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker, retired, and proud of it. Today for me, it's November 16th. It's a Friday. For you, it's probably 5 days later on November 21st or 22nd, or the week after that, or the week after that, or the week after that. I will do one show before Christmas. I do about a show a month. However, it's shown once a week. So anything I say is completely obsolete by the time you see it. Now, that was doubly true for last month's show. When I was doing last month's show, for me, it was the middle of October. You probably saw it the week before the election, or you saw it the week after the election. I'm sure you were wondering, what the heck is this? How clueless is this guy? However, I wasn't as clueless as I could have been. And the reason is because I predicted that Bentham wasn't going to work and that Obama was going to win. He was going to win in most of the swing states. And I had taken a look at Nate Silver, 538.com, some of these other polling sites, and it basically talked about how even though the margin of error was sometimes greater than the Obama advantage, Obama was ahead in most of the swing states on all but one in some cases of the polls. In which case you won't have a situation where things are randomly distributed, and yet every single data point is on the Obama side. So I said that I thought he'd be elected, and that he would win the electoral vote. I wasn't sure about the popular vote, but I even said that I thought he would win the popular vote. And the main reason, and I never made much of a secret of it, is that Romney was a pathological liar and sociopath, and people were going to recognize that. And the good news for me, and I think the nation as a whole, is that people did recognize that, and Romney lost. And there's been a lot of recrimination since then. Why did he lose? And so on and so forth. However, the bottom line is that I think most people recognized that somebody who says one thing to one audience and the opposite thing to the other audience, and one thing to in the primaries and the complete opposite thing in the debates, is either lying then or lying now, but is a liar. And on top of that, he wouldn't come up with his taxes, which was a tradition up to that time. I think giving out 5 to 6 years or maybe 10 years of your tax returns is going to go back to being a tradition because he's the only one who bucked it in the last 30 years. And he bucked it, and he didn't win. The other couple things was I think that he thought he was going to win, and the Republicans thought they were going to win. And the main reason they thought they were going to win was because of two specific pollsters, Gallup and Rasmussen, who were Republican-leaning pollsters. And up to a few days before the election, they had Romney up in likely voters. The max was Gallup at 7 points. I believe that at different points, Rasmussen had him up 4 points. But right before the election, they decided, well, we don't want to look like complete fools. And the day before the election, Rasmussen was Romney up 1 point, and Gallup was even Steven. So did Romney lose all this momentum and all of a sudden go from 7 points ahead to even Steven? No, not at all. All the other polls pointed that Obama was a little bit ahead, and that in the swing states, Obama was 2 to 5 points ahead, sometimes 6. So Obama won pretty convincingly, especially in the electoral vote. In Florida, however, took about a week, or at least 4 or 5 days, before they came in with the final tally, and Obama was ahead 50,000 votes. Now, some things that happened in Florida that were pretty iffy. The first thing was these giant voter purges, and every time the governor tried a voter purge, first it was 80,000 votes, and then people that they were just going to question their right to vote. And then if they didn't answer, if they didn't respond, they would lose their right to vote. So the courts had a problem with this, and everybody else had a problem with this. Finally, by the time it was over, he had whittled it down to 900 or something, of which about 300 or 400 lost their right to vote. But that wasn't nearly the total impact. Total impact was that previously, the previous federal election, I believe there were 14 early voter days. The governor reduced it down to 8 and reduced the hours of them. They was challenged, and they were forced to put some of them back, but they reduced the hours. They ended up with tremendously long lines all over the minority areas of Florida, Broward, Miami-Dade, so on and so forth. Even in some areas in what they call the I-5 corridor, I think it was called I-4 corridor, I forgot the name of it, but basically it's between Tampa, Orlando, and Cocoa Beach. So that corridor was supposed to be very Republican and ended up not being so. So basically they figured, well, if we make it really hard to vote, there were lines 6, 7, 8 hours long. They actually kept the polls open, but only for people who were in line before the official voting time. So there were cases when the official voting time ended at 6 or 7 o'clock. I think it was 7 o'clock. And there were still people waiting to vote at 12, midnight, and 1 o'clock. And they still had to keep them open to vote. But they wouldn't open them for any new people that came in. So everything that was done for the purpose of keeping Democratic areas, making it difficult to vote, reduction of polling places, and all these different things. And yet, Obama still won by 50,000. And a lot of the reason was because of Hispanic voters. Meanwhile, Ohio was the most important this year swing state. And in Ohio, Obama won by 200,000 votes. The Republicans who had taken over Ohio in 2010, Kasich is the governor, they took over the legislature, and they pushed through a voter ID law that was going to take effect right before the election and before people that, ride on buses and don't have driver's licenses were able to get them. There are a limited number of places and so on and so forth. They also consolidated the polling places so that there were fewer polling places. And basically, they did everything. They were going to throw out all the provisional ballots. There were phone calls from Republican outfits that said that go vote on the day after voting day on November 7th instead of November 6th, and sent people to the wrong polling place. And then basically the Secretary of State, who had just tried all kinds of tricks with early voting, tried to suppress early voting on weekends, and all of his attempts were shot down by the courts. So the Democratic side had a lot of lawyers, and the courts just came in and said no to voter suppression. If you're going to have an voter ID law, you need time for everybody to get their voter ID. So they suppressed they kicked out the voter ID law in Pennsylvania, the voter ID law in Wisconsin, the voter ID law in Ohio. No, I think they didn't have an ID law in Ohio, but they reduced the days and the access to early voting in Ohio. And there was a tradition, souls to polls, where the black churches would bus up all their people on Sunday right before the election and go early vote together. They didn't tell them how to vote. They could have been Republicans or Democrats, but let's face it, Obama got 95% approximately of the black vote. So the Secretary of State in Ohio closed early voting on that Sunday. And the courts went to the courts. The Democrats rushed it to the courts, and the court system came out. And they said, no, you can't. So he said, all right, I'll have early voting, but only 4 hours. The result was in the swing state of Ohio, in the swing state of Iowa, in the swing state of Florida, there were just incredibly long lines, 4, 5, 6 hours, 7 hours in some cases, where people in the cold, because it is November, not necessarily cold in Florida, but certainly cold in some of these areas, old people, so on and so forth, having to sit on lines for hours and hours and hours and wait for the vote. However, the whole thing backfired because people got angry. There was so much publicity about the voter suppression. There was so much publicity, especially in the Hispanic areas, that official documents were being sent out that told Hispanics to vote on the wrong day and at the wrong polling place. There was so much anger that polling places were closed, especially in big cities and minority areas, for administrative purposes or to improve efficiency. And all of this came together, and it caused people in the targeted groups to vote and to want to vote more. So all the voter suppression together probably contributed to Romney losing the election, not winning it. Especially since so many of these things had been overturned by the courts. Now in Pennsylvania, for instance, the voter ID law, which was basically if you didn't have a state ID, which is mostly your driver's license, you had to go to certain places, only to official DMVs, to get your ID. And some of them were not even in the county. There were very few of them, especially in the big cities of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. And it was established that the line waiting and so on and so forth was so bad when it went to the court that if everybody showed up at these motor vehicle departments who needed this special ID, plus they had to bring their birth certificate and their which they may or may not have, their passports, but an expired passport, even though you have to be a citizen to get a passport, is no good. If you were a veteran, they wouldn't take your veteran's ID card, even though you had to be a citizen to get your honorable discharge papers, or likely. All of this kind of stuff was all thrown together, and it was impossible for them to try to honestly get these ideas for all the people that were there. So the court just threw the whole thing out. And then it went back to this judge who had allowed it, who had reservations about it and allowed it. It went to the state, I believe, Supreme Court, went back down to the appeal guy, and he said, well, I don't know. Then it went back up to the top and came back to him, and he said, the voter ID law stands, but you don't need voter ID to vote in this particular election. So what was the result? They had poll watchers, especially Republican poll watchers, who were telling people, if you don't have the ID, get out of here, which was illegal. So all these kind of things were happening, and yet, not only did Obama win, he won 332 electoral votes, but he also won the popular vote by over 3 million, and all the votes aren't yet counted. Now, where are the votes most likely not to have been completely counted. Well, our beautiful state of Arizona, we've managed to outdo Florida in incompetence, and my own congressional seat, which is now held by Ron Barber, is still up in the air. There's provisional ballots. Apparently, again, new voters that registered were not sent their voter cards in time. Consequently, they weren't written down in the voter books when they went to their polling place, and they had to fill out provisional ballots. And of course, our Secretary of State, Bennett, also a Republican, said, "I'm throwing out all the provisional ballots." Of course, he wasn't allowed to do that. But there's, been a complete mess up on early votes. I early voted myself, and it appears that my vote wasn't counted until the day before. Now, that makes absolutely no sense, because the easiest votes to count, to pre-count, are early votes. So you have them all there. So why the early votes were counted last? So this particular one, McSally versus Barber, went from on election day, McSally winning by 1,300, to now Barber winning by 960, almost 1,000 votes, with something like 11,000 provisional ballots in his area or his district still uncounted. So every day his count goes up, and it looks to me like he might win. Meanwhile, a Democrat won in the other district in Tucson against Kirkpatrick beat Patton, and a Democrat, Sinema, won in Maricopa County. Figure that one out. So a lot of this voter suppression just didn't work this year. And meanwhile, in what seems like an eternity from the election, but it was only for me a week and a half, for you a couple weeks. Who knows what's going to happen? We've had the CIA director resign right before he was about to be quizzed by the Senate Intelligence Committee on the Benghazi scandal or non-scandal or whatever you want to call it. We have war breaking out in Israel, of all places, between Israel and Gaza, where the Gazans are shooting missiles at Israel, and Israel is just bombing the stuffing out of the Hamas. And the Muslim Brotherhood member president of Egypt kind of stuck in the middle trying to negotiate a truce. Today, we hear that 30,000 Israeli troops are being called up, possibly as many as 70,000, and being rushed to the border of Gaza. So by the time you see this, there could be a war in the Middle East, or somebody, everybody could back off and not go through with it. Why would that happen? Well, it's hard to say. Netanyahu has been very upset about all these missiles coming from Gaza, and better missiles getting smuggled into Gaza, which he doesn't like, and for good reason. But also, if Iran is close to getting a nuclear bomb, and Netanyahu called out what the red line was, which is, I think it was 90% possibility or something, or 90% uranium enrichment, then he's going to go attack Iran. Well, he doesn't want to have Hezbollah missiles after him and Gaza missiles, so it would probably behoove him before that necessity to wipe out all the missiles, at least in Gaza, even if he can't do that in Lebanon. Meanwhile, there's a frumious civil war going on in Syria. And in Benghazi, our ambassador was killed in a attack by a jihadist militia group called Ansar al-Sharia. The same day that there were demonstrations in Egypt and all over the Middle East 15 different countries about video that insulted Muhammad. Video, oddly enough, that was actually traced to a Coptic Christian who settled in California and was a con man and was on probation and forbidden to use a computer at all. And meanwhile, he uploaded this video. So he was actually arrested for a probation violation a little later, but not before people were killed because he was being very irresponsible. And meanwhile, in the midst of all these demonstrations, there's an actual attack on 9/11 against a small consulate in Benghazi, which is the eastern part of Libya. And, you know, we had just basically saved the Libyan people from just getting crushed by Gaddafi, got rid of Gaddafi, who had actually terrorized Americans, shot down an airliner, killed American soldiers in a disco in Germany, or blew them up, and done some really horrible things. We were happy to see him overthrown, and we helped a lot. So, meanwhile, right there's Benghazi. In the aftermath, the Libyan people were pretty happy that we had set up a no-fly zone, supported their revolution against Gaddafi, but there were jihadists over there. And the jihadists were run out of that town after the incident, and they were run out of their base that was outside of the town, and now they're barely holding on in a little base about right on the border of Egypt, about 50 miles away. So we have assets over there. The whole thing is very hush-hush. We're trying to give them justice and so on and so forth. And meanwhile, the Republicans are making a big giant fuss in the House. The same guy that pushed was one of the guys that pushed the Clinton impeachment, a Republican in the House named Issa. He was hitting. This was a terrorist attack, and this was that, and this was that. It actually came to a head in the second debate when Romney was watching Fox News and not checking anything. In the debate, said that Obama had not declared that it was a terrorist attack, when in fact Obama had stated that in his statement the next day. However, the secretary or the ambassador to the UN, Susan Rice, semi-contradicted, said, we don't have all the facts, but we think it had something to do with these demonstrations against the video. And of course, all the other countries around it were having demonstrations against the video and attacking American embassies. So it was a logical thing, but they didn't have all the facts, or they actually knew who was behind it and they were tracing them. So what does this Issa do? This guy in charge of a House committee run by Republicans, he releases sensitive but non-classified. Well, I worked for the government. Sensitive is a classification. It is illegal to release anything labeled sensitive. It is a classification. It is not sensitive but unclassified. That's what the news said it was. There's no such thing. If something is classified as sensitive, that is the lowest level of classification. Therefore, it is classified. And he released a whole bunch of State Department cables and mentioned names of our allies in Benghazi who could be targeted by the enemy. So that was pretty bad. And meanwhile, and I haven't had time to go into it, I don't know whether next month it'll be an issue. We have the head of the CIA, who's Petraeus, in my opinion, one of the best generals we've had in the last 100 years. He's humiliated in a sex scandal involving emails sent by his mistress. Thank you.